Yo. Back up in the building. Welcome to another edition of Harris's Drinking Again podcast. Harry's drinking again? And this evening, I got a very special guest, an author, a producer, film historian, podcaster, and a documentarian. He's written about 6 books. This man is a know-it-all on the Twilight series, Twilight Zone, James Bond fanatic extraordinaire. He has a James Bond encyclopedia, movie encyclopedia that he's going to get into us here, and we're going to chop it up. The man here, Stephen Jay Rubin. How you doing, sir?
Great to see you, James. I love the name of your show. Are you drinking again? Is it true?
It is. I couldn't help myself. I had to start it off with a cranberry vodka. Harris is drinking again, and I noticed when we on the back end booking this show, you like a little amaretto sour yourself from time to time.
Yeah, I am what you call a wussy drinker. You know, unlike James Bond, who likes his martinis shaken, not stirred, I like my pina coladas sweet and moist.
All right. I like a couple things sweet and moist. Well, we got great things in common there. Before we get into some of your background and things like that, I like to start the show, loosey goosey. Harris is drinking again. This is like your local pub. You come in, you have a drink. You got your amaretto sour. You got your martini. Are you a gin martini or vodka?
I am a non-martini guy.
Oh, non-martini. Okay,
non-martini.
Non-martini. Okay, I like gin myself. Gin on the rocks. But you got your amaretto sour. I noticed I was looking up your history. You're also a Virgo.
I am a total Virgo. I was born on September 9th, which according to the U.S. Census is the most popular birthday in America.
Wow, September 9th. I am a September 3rd, baby. So 2 fellow Virgos in the house.
2 fellow Virgos. We like everything in order.
Yes. Very, very order driven, hygiene, things of that nature. And I had to pull up something here, a lot of the career paths that Virgos go on. A lot of them are authors. We can be clerical workers, very organized in that direction. Does that play a big role? Are you a big astrology guy, or is that something you kind of play around with a little bit?
I find it interesting, but I've never delved too deeply. I was once told that if you read your horoscope in the newspaper, it's like 1/10 of what your horoscope is. If you really want to know what your world's like, you have to have your whole chart read, not just one whatever. So, yeah, I find it kind of interesting. I don't know if I believe that certain couples are matched by their astrology sign, whether that matters much, but I know that at least amongst the sexes, that there is kind of a certain thing that has to line up properly. It was once explained to me that we're half man, half woman. The levels are various. Some men are very effeminate and not very masculine. Some women are very masculine, not very effeminate. You try to get the right levels. You want to be with someone, your partner, who is kind of matches your personality. And I think that I got very lucky. I've been married for 28 years and I'm very happy. I think my wife and I are a good match, but I don't think it has anything to do with astrology.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I put a little bit into it, not much. It's fun to play around with. I like the Chinese version of the horoscope thing. I'm a fire rabbit. I like the elements and things. But I do find it interesting. Other popular Virgos, whether Michael Jackson, Beyonce, Charlie Sheen. I believe Robert Greene is a Virgo as well. I'm not sure. I thought I'd seen that sometime.
On my birthday, we've got Adam Sandler. I've got Hugh Grant, Angela Cartwright from the old Make Room for Daddy series. I think Richard Gere is also a Virgo. Yeah, no, I think they say that September birthdays are the most popular because everybody fools around at New Year's.
There you go. Yeah, makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. And I also seen you're a UCLA Bruin, and
Total Bruin. Yep. I was there when Bill Walton was our center on the basketball team, and our team won 88 games in a row.
wow, you were there during that whole era.
I was. I was during the Walton era, and now I'm a big fan of the current team, which is challenging. I think going to be challenging. I think the basketball verse. I like the basketball team. I'm a basketball fan. I was born in Chicago, so even though I've lived in LA most of my life, I have a fondness for Chicago teams. I embraced the Michael Jordan teams like just tremendously back in the 90s. So I had 6 great championship years with them. And in fact, right here on my desk,
A little bit there.
yeah, there's the 91 team. That was Michael's first championship team.
Oh yeah,
And that was just a lot of fun.
that's excellent. Yeah, I'm a '90s, '80s baby, '90s kid. I was from Nevada, and so I had the option of not having a team. So I followed the Chicago Bulls, Dallas Cowboys. But being a Michael Jordan fan, it led me to being a big UNC Tar Heel fan.
Sure.
Of course, I go for the UNLV Rebels and the Reno Wolfpack. But they have their runs here.
Yeah, well, the Wolfpack, they knocked off the Bruins on one of those streaks. They actually, I think they ended their championship run. They're formidable. It's interesting. They announced this year that UCLA and USC are moving to the Big Ten in 24, which is going to be interesting.
Yeah, I don't like the way they're doing the whole rearranging things. It was Pac-10, Pac-12, and now Big Ten. It's like way over there. I don't know. It doesn't make sense.
It's all about money. They see the big money in the Big Ten. A lot of the Pacific Coast teams don't get much coverage, and they just went for the money, which of course is the whole theory of life these days. People just go for the money. Do you like baseball?
I like to play it, and I liked it when I was growing up. I'm not a big baseball fan anymore these days, but again, the old school guys, King Griffey Jr. and Frank Thomas, are some of my 2 favorite players.
The Big Hurt.
Yes. Yeah.
Sure.
Albert Bell. I like all those like late 90s players, man. The Randy Johnson era, all that good stuff.
Of course.
And I go to our minor league baseball team every summer, the Bees, Salt Lake Bees. So
I'm not really a soccer guy at all, but I got kind of interested in the World Cup because I've been watching this reality show on TV called Wrexham. Welcome to Wrexham, which is about Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, the 2 actors, buy a Welsh soccer team. It's kind of I call it a kind of a mockumentary type show, but it got me interested in soccer, and I ended up watching some of the soccer matches. I had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, I seen a few of them. I'm a bartender by trade, so it goes hand in hand with the show. So I was watching the World Cup a lot at work and everything.
The nice thing about the World Cup is, which separates it from all American sports, is no commercials.
I love that scene in Any Given Sunday. When Al Pacino's at the bar and he's, said the day or the game when they cut to a commercial break, that was the day he knew. It was over. The game was changing. One of my favorite scenes. Harry's drinking again. Why? Thank you again for blessing us here at the Harris is Drinking Again podcast. Can you go into a little bit? You said you're from Chicago, Illinois. Just go into your upbringing and kind of your, maybe into your high school, early college days, and maybe how that puts you on a path to ultimately where you led up to are now.
Well, I think in terms of my whole path, I think that it probably started when we moved out to California from Chicago, and I moved into a duplex in West Los Angeles, literally across the street from a movie theater. So I spent most of my youth at that theater every Saturday, 2 films and a cartoon. And then my parents took me to their films, you know, adult films. Of course, in those days, adult films had a different connotation. Uh, and I just love movies. My parents were big moviegoers. My mother particularly knew the names of all the stars and their backgrounds, who they were married to, all the scandal stuff. So, you know, kind of before I learned my multiplication tables, I was learning that Clark Gable was different from Cornell Wilde, who was different from Phil Silvers and Mickey Rooney. So I grew up kind of in, even though we weren't technically a show business family, I grew up with a lot of love of film. And then when I went to UCLA, I liked to write. That was kind of a thing I developed in high school. It's funny, in high school, I remember we had an English class where they would give you new vocabulary words every week, and you had to fashion a story out of those words. So each week, this shows you when this was, I created a Star Trek episode. So with my vocabulary words, and I had a lot of fun doing that. When I got to UCLA, I applied for a job at the Daily Bruin as a journalist. And I had a lot of fun doing that. And when I saw somebody reading one of my stories, I was hooked. I said, this is what I want to be. I want to be a writer. And when I got out of college, I took a series of part-time and full-time jobs to support myself while I pursued my writing ambitions. And my first book, which was published in 1981, was called Combat Films, American Realism, 1945 to 1970. I'd interviewed the men and women who made the great World War II movies of the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And shortly after that, I started writing my first book on the James Bond films, which was the first book to go behind the scenes. That was called The James Bond Films, A Behind the Scenes History. I was also a staff writer at a magazine in Chicago called Cine Fantastique, which was the first magazine to chronicle the kind of interesting history behind science fiction, fantasy, and horror movies. So that really jump-started my career into Hollywood. But I got to tell you, James, I couldn't make any money doing that. That was not a living. That was what I call egg money. So I had to find a living, because I wasn't going to be a parking lot attendant or a delivery guy for the rest of my life. So what happened was I became a publicist. And I didn't know anything about public relations, publicity, promotion. But when I got back from my research trip for that James Bond book, I went to England, a friend said that PR agencies are always looking for writers. Because in a PR agency, people write a lot of things. They write little biographies, they write pitch letters, they write presentations, they write stories. So I came back to LA and I got a job in a company called Stan Rosenfield and Associates. And that was a regular PR agency where they had clients, and the job of the publicist was to get them into print and on television. And that was my first job.
Would you say, going back a little bit in your upbringing and childhood, was college kind of always the mindset in the household? You know, you go to school, then after that you go to college or the army. And then a two-part question. And then also, did you, as a kid, were you the kid that was always doing poetry, maybe always getting good grades in your English and like literature classes?
Well, first of all, to answer your first question about college, no one in my family had ever gone to college. You know, I was the first person who, graduating from high school in 1969, everybody went to college then. That was the thing. You went from high school to college. I'm sure there are people who went to trade school, but amongst my circle of friends, we all went to college. Primarily in the city. Nobody went back east to some fancy college. We all went to the local schools, and for LA, UCLA was pretty local. Poetry, no, I've never been much of a poet, but being an only child, I had a huge imagination. And I was always making up stuff, whether it was a story idea or my vocabulary things. And I got into writing. My term papers were rather lengthy. I enjoyed history. I think history had a big impact on my upbringing because I was reading all these books about American history. There was a series of books in the '60s called the Landmark series, and they were landmark books on various historical periods, particularly World War II. World War II was a big deal for me when I was growing up, even though the war had been over for 15 years. It was in the comic books, it was in the regular books, it was on TV, it was in the movies. And I seem to have a strong interest in finding out what was World War II.
I'm an only child also, so I can definitely relate to that. Always having to use your imagination. I asked you that because kind of why I'm on this path here. Growing up, I always liked poetry and writing, and then that led me to music when I was about 18 to 25, 26, and then I'm kind of going into this media side of things, but it all stems back like to writing, whether it's notes or preparation, or, getting ideas off my head. So I just kind of wanted to, see if where that all stemmed from. Would you say at what was it when you landed the PR firm job, or at what age or time in your life would you say, you wake up every day and you found that sense of, I wake up and live my true purpose, and I get compensated.
That's a real good question. I mean, I was in PR for almost 30 years. So yet I would not say that was my purpose. I think everything was a means to an end. I did not know I wanted to be a film producer and a screenwriter when I started out. I thought those people were way ahead of me. I had no idea how to write a script. But what happened was I started to work on films themselves. And, I would be part of the crew. That PR agency led me to becoming a feature unit publicist, which is a crew position. You work on the film. I worked on Pretty in Pink, the John Hughes movie. I spent 3 months on the set. I'm the primary PR liaison on that movie. If Entertainment Tonight wants to come to the set, they go through me. I worked with a still photographer to create pictures. I worked on that picture, and we actually did what became the poster shot of that film. I was always assigned to the sequel to a hit movie. So I worked on Porky's 2. I worked on Weekend at Bernie's 2. I worked on Eddie and the Cruisers 2. And then I worked on Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, which was the sequel to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And working on a film set, seeing the film in process, really inspired me, because I'd been promoting everybody else's movies over the years, and I began to realize that I have ideas. They could be movies. What do I do? So that was it was all kind of leading to a certain direction. And I've maintained other careers at the same time. I've continued to be an author and a film historian, and I do my own podcast as well. But I think everything is kind of a means to the end I want, and my end is to make my own movies. And I've done 5, 3 features and 2 documentaries, and I'm developing about 27 different projects right now.
Wow, that's amazing. That's the level. That's what I love to hear about, is those stories. Is to me, that's just completely living with purpose. You've taken the reins, and it's like you say, I want to make this art, I want to live this lifestyle, and you've been able to do that.
Well, at least I'm trying. It's not easy. I mean, I would say that movies and television is probably the most competitive industry in the world, and I equate myself with that guy climbing up the wall of a castle as your army's invading, and there's somebody at the top trying to bash you off the wall. And I'm always getting bashed off that wall, but I keep getting back on that ladder. And I think that pure tenaciousness eventually does pay off in crazy show business. It's just you have to. One thing about show business is, unless it's in your blood, and unless you have this attitude, this is the only thing I can do, and I'm going to do it, that you won't succeed. You can't kind of dip your toe and think, maybe I'll try show business. That's not how it works. You're immediately competing with 10,000 other people who would rather die than give up show business. So you have to develop kind of an alligator skin and an ability to just get rejected constantly with the knowledge that what you're doing is good, that you've seen the light, that you've got the word. It is a form of a religion in a way.
Speak like 79, 80. The process to even get the book out. What kind of life were you living in? What was your mindset at the time?
Oh yeah, well, I was actually a senior at UCLA. It was 1973. I actually started interviewing filmmakers. When I was at the Daily Brew and writing, stories on the campus, I started, interviewing a lot of people. So I got into the whole thing of holding a tape recorder and getting people on tape. Those are the days we had those little cassette recorders. And so when I got out of college, I started to think maybe I'll write a book about World War II movies because that was a passion. They always say write about something that you find interesting. And I thought there might be a market for it. So I started, and I didn't know quite how to reach these filmmakers. But one day I opened the LA Times, the LA yellow pages, the white pages, and I saw that there was a screenwriter who worked on a movie that was on my list of movies to cover. And so I went and interviewed Michael Blankfort. Now, Michael Blankfort was a blacklisted screenwriter during that period when writers were getting blacklisted because they were accused of having communist leanings. A lot of it was ridiculous. If you attended some kind of leftist meeting, you were identified by the FBI as a communist. Well, Michael wrote a movie in 1950 called Halls of Montezuma. It was a Richard Widmark World War II and the Pacific Marines movie, which was very interesting. Had a big cast. There was Jack Palance, Richard Widmark, Carl Malden, Martin Milner, Robert Wagner, Skippy Homeyer. It was a great cast, and I sat down and I interviewed him at length about the making of that movie. And then I told him my ambition to do all these World War II movies behind the scenes, and he introduced me to Robert Pyrash, who wrote Battleground, and Robert Pyrash introduced me to Edmund North, who wrote Patton, and Edmund North introduced me to this, and so on and so forth. So I interviewed probably over 50 people that first couple years, and it took 8 years, but I got it published in 1981.
Yeah.
By the way, learning about how to sell a book, I wrote a pitch letter and I sent it to one publisher, and it took them a year to say no. I was told don't double pitch, go to one publisher at a time and wait for an answer. Well, that was baloney. Basically, once they said no, I wrote 62 letters to 62 publishers. I got 59 rejections within 2 weeks. 3 publishers expressed some interest, and 1 published my book. So there you go.
So persistent and just keeping tenacity, like you said, not taking no for an answer.
Exactly.
What would you? Is there any advice that you could give to a young man, say early 20s, mid 20s, that's wants to maybe produce an ebook or something like that of these natures, or maybe speak what's the difference that they have?
Well, it depends on your subject matter. If you're doing a film book about the film business, you're not going to do an ebook because people aren't reading ebooks about the film business pretty much. Ebooks are generally best for people who have business strategies. So if you want to do an ebook on real estate or on playing the stock market or e-commerce or cryptocurrency, and you've got something to say, then it probably makes sense for ebooks as a possibility because you're going to do your whole social media to get that word out there. One thing I learned when I was finishing my book, The Twilight Zone Encyclopedia, which we talked about, I was prepared to go down the route of approaching publishers again, and somebody suggested that I self-publish. You sell your book for $19, you keep $19. You sell this book to Penguin, they sell it, they give you $2. So what's wrong with that picture? But what they don't tell you is that most reviewers won't review a book that's self-published. And because you're doing your own marketing, it's hard to get in bookstores. And they say that the average self-published book sells 100 copies. Well, that wasn't going to work for me. So I'd rather take less money because I wasn't really writing the books for the money, My PR career was keeping me, keeping the rent paid and the roof over my head. So I think self-publishing doesn't really work for me. I think that you should try to get a book published, because when you publish a book, you're separating yourself from most people. Most people never write a book in their life. Once you write a book, you are in a different class, and it makes it a little easier to sell your second book.
Yo, 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 yo. You have been listening to the Harris's Drinking Again pubcast. For more, go to YouTube, type in @HideaPubcast. Look us up on Spotify, any and all streaming platforms. Harris's Drinking Again pubcast. Thank you. We gotta come with the news. Yeah, that you know.